and welcome to Film Rant. This week we're looking at Leonardo Di Caprio's latest attempt to get an Oscar with Revenant, directed by Alejandro Iñárritu, I think. I know this has been out in America for the better part of a month, but it only came out in the UK about a week ago, so that's why this review may be late to some of you. I'd heard nothing but good things from you lot across the pond, so I had high hopes for this movie. I mean, DiCaprio alone is enough to get any man excited, but, well, not in that way. Fair warning, spoilers sit to your head, so don't continue if you don't want anything ruined. Straight off the bat, The Revenant surprised me with its introduction to the main character, Hugh Glass, played by DiCaprio. We see him slowly hunting a deer that then evolves into him and his crew being attacked by Native Americans. Now normally this would be a scene which would showcase our protagonist's fighting abilities. It shows us what he's capable of and how well equipped he is for the obstacles he's going to face in the rest of the movie. The Revenant turns that on its head entirely. DiCaprio runs into the fight and gets himself in a brawl with one of the natives. This native whoops his arse. DiCaprio takes a heavier beating than Rihanna if she overcooks Chris Brown's bacon and is pinned to the floor and choked by the frame of a bow. We assume he's going to eventually break out of it, but Iñárritu focuses on DiCaprio and leaves the shot just long enough that we know he's not going to break free. He's dead here, until he's saved by one of his comrades. This native wasn't anything particularly special either. He wasn't oversized or a dead ringer for John Cena, he was pretty much your average Joe. That's what made DiCaprio's defeat a good introduction. It straight up told us from the off that this dude was vulnerable. He's not invincible in the slightest, and just because he's a protagonist, don't assume he won't die or won't fulfill his objective. This made the following fight scenes and survival element of the movie that much more poignant, and it was a brilliant introduction to his character. The supporting character in this is John Fitzgerald, played by everybody's favourite hunk Tom Hardy. Fitzgerald is a much more refined character than Glass. For the majority of the film, Glass can't talk as the result of a bear attack, whereas Fitzgerald holds most of the dialogue, even if most of it is completely intangible and sounds like Buffalo Bill having a mild stroke. Which is a big issue. For about the first 40 minutes or so of the movie, I couldn't understand a single word Tom Hardy was saying, and I still couldn't at some points later in the movie. It's strange that a British actor can fake an American accent so strong that even British people can't understand it, but whatever. My ultimate point about Fitzgerald is that even though he's the villain and we obviously side with DiCaprio, I came out of the movie knowing more about Fitzgerald than I did about DiCaprio, which is something that's uncommon in movies. I can't really say it was a negative because the movie still makes us side with DiCaprio through the idea of revenge. It is a shame though that all we really found out about DiCaprio is that he had a Native American wife who was slaughtered by white men, and well, that's pretty much it. I would have liked to have explored DiCaprio a little more, that's what she said, even if it wasn't entirely necessary. It would have maybe tied us to his cause more. Hardy is actually a decent villain because even though his actions are extreme, we can understand why he wants to let DiCaprio die. Yeah, he's getting paid to keep him alive and he does care about money, but I get the impression he cares about getting him and his crew out of there alive more. He just goes well off the rails. I also enjoyed how at the end it showed he grew to appreciate his mate Eyebrows, even if it was because he didn't tell everyone he murdered DiCaprio's lad. With regards to the script, I actually thought I handled the lack of dialogue really well. The last film I watched before this was The Hateful Eight, and that's a huge jump in terms of dialogue. The Hateful Eight is basically 3 hours of guys talking to each other. DiCaprio used to be a conversationalist like most people, but then he took a bear to the throat. I watched The Revenant totally blind, so I had no idea DiCaprio wasn't really going to have any lines in it. However, because of the lack of dialogue, the film was allowed to simply show DiCaprio's struggle in the freezing wilderness of Louisiana Purchase, without having to resort to the kind of inner monologue dialogue you see in movies like 127 Hours and The Martian. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, they're both great movies. It was just nice to see a film that just focused on the protagonist really struggling to survive. There were times where I felt I would have liked a little bit more dialogue, but ultimately The Revenant is one of the best survival movies I've ever seen. It's incredibly immersive with what it does technically too, but I'll get to that later. One scene that is absolutely worth mentioning is the bear attack scene. Like the opening battle scene, it's absolutely savage and absolutely thrilling to watch. The way the bear tears at him and rags him about like a dead prostitute is brutal. It again plays into the idea that DiCaprio is vulnerable. From the moment the bear gets the jump on him, he's at a major disadvantage and you can almost feel the heavy stomps and slashes as the bear attacks. DiCaprio looks like he's gone a few rounds with John Cena before he finally manages to stab his dagger into his foe and emerge victorious. Now DiCaprio is attacked on 3 consecutive occasions by this bear. I know I said the scene further makes him vulnerable, but surviving 3 consecutive bear attacks is a bit much. Now I know he plays dead and this is based on a true story, but I'd have preferred it if the bear just fucked him up on the first attack and left him for dead, or he he manages to kill it in the first attack to show he's a resilient survivor. But the absolute worst thing about this scene is that it results in orphan teddy bears, and I can't stand shit like that. But overall, this scene is so well done and the sound design on it is superb. It's probably the most brutal and probably accurate depiction of a bear attack I've ever seen on screen. One thing that surprised me for a big Oscar-baiting film like The Revenant was that its story was delightfully simple. At first I struggled to see where it was going and when we were going to get into the revenge story, but once Tom Hardy went actor on DiCaprio's son, it got interesting. Then for about the next 2 hours or so, we just see DiCaprio relentlessly survive the cold to wreak vengeance on his comrade, along with keeping tabs on how Tom Hardy and Eyebrows are getting on. There's not really any big twists or turns, it's pretty much a straight jog to the finish line. This actually worked very well. It made the whole film about survival instead of relationship drama. Obviously the ultimate goal was revenge, but for the majority of the movie DiCaprio's main enemy was nature itself, and I love that. My main issue with The Revenant though was that while it was a thoroughly gripping film, it did go far too slow. There was times when I found myself just willing it to move on and pick up the pace a little. It's probably just a personal thing, as I know there are many people out there who like slow burners, but I just feel that it could have been condensed in a few parts and could have been quickened a little. As I mentioned earlier, it took quite a while to get going, and aside from the bear attack and opening battle, I was fairly bored and lost as I just couldn't see where this was all going. Once it got going though, it became much more interesting. It just still went on a bit too long. Ultimately, I don't think it needed the Indian story with the guy looking for his daughter. The only payoff it seemed to have was that at the end, DiCaprio was able to let God decide Tom Hardy's fate by having him drift to the group, and they wouldn't slaughter DiCaprio because he saved the chief's daughter from being raped. But let's face it mate, you knew fine well those natives were going to kill him, the blood is on your hands. It just felt like such a poor payoff. It was like feeling a massive sneeze coming on, and when it finally arrives it just sort of trickles out, not giving you the satisfaction that you wanted. I would rather Iñárritu just eradicated this subplot from the script entirely in order to shorten the movie and focus entirely on DiCaprio, Hardy and Eyebrows. In terms of the technical aspects, I have to say that the sound design is absolutely superb. Probably one of the best films I've ever seen when it comes to sound and use of surround sound. They really did it right in this film. You could hear every gust of wind, every snowdrop and every footstep through the harsh wilderness DiCaprio found himself in. I don't know if it was actually cold in the cinema, but I felt cold watching this film, and I feel that was partly due to the absolutely fantastic sound design. The opening scene utilises sound so well. It was like the western version of the opening of Saving Private Ryan. There's not too much music and you can just hear every gunshot, ricochet and arrow fired, as well as the stampeding horses and screams. You could watch this movie with your eyes closed and still be entirely encapsulated by its terrific sound design. The cinematography in The Revenant was also something to behold. I loved how Iñárritu chose to end each stage of the story with a slow shot of the beautiful vistas around Louisiana Purchase. I mean, it's hard not to do wonderful cinematography when you have environments like that to shoot in, but nevertheless, the shots are breathtaking. There was some pretty cool rebirth imagery when DiCaprio climbed out of the horse after he did a Luke Skywalker and spent the night inside a dead animal. My personal favourite shot in the whole movie comes near the end when DiCaprio was being tracked down by the men from the village. He emerges from the forest while it's on fire behind him and he is silhouetted against it. It was like he was the Walking Dead, which is the very definition of The Revenant. It's just a wonderful shot. The movie starts off with a lot of faked one-shots too, but they still look fantastic. The opening battle is all shot in one, but you can see certain points where it was cut and continued later. I still have absolutely no issue with that, as it was great to see the camera elegantly traverse the battlefield and capture everything beautifully. The Revenant has some of the most impressive cinematography I've seen in a long while. It's basically film porn. So to round everything up, I think The Revenant is a well-crafted movie from a technical standpoint and features some solid points in the script, such as the opening battle and the bear attack scene. I love that the movie is more focused on survival than revenge, and I think that the little dialogue and simple story really lend themselves to that ideal. My only criticisms are its extremely slow pacing and lack of character depth for DiCaprio. Tom Hardy is a much more interesting character in a lot of ways, which is a weird choice considering he's the villain. They should have cut the Indian storyline entirely, but it's not a huge issue that it remained in the final cut. The big question is, will DiCaprio get an Oscar for this? Well, he's up against Eddie Redmayne and the Oscars love a good social justice movie, so I'm not too sure. But I'm sure The Revenant will get all the awards it deserves. The Revenant gets a solid 4 frames out of 5. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time on Film Rant.
What happened?
We did what we had to do. He was buried right.